So I now want to take a big step back, and this partly supports some of the drivers, some of the geopolitics around some of the macro themes. But the way I see the world at the moment, in terms of the fiscal stimulus that may come and has started to already happen, we're going to move from cutting checks to consumers to specifically directing investment to favored industries in large markets around the world. There's growing evidence. The governments are around the world, large governments are pivoting towards investment. You can see that in some of the supply chain legislation that's recently been passed in the United States. And there's a bit of the European Union catching up. And this is a picture from yesterday when they announced, the latest detail around their Critical Raw Materials Act, which is really their response to the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, passed last August. And then underneath all this, we have China reopening, and what industries are going to be favored, through Chinese direct stimulus, and what does all this mean? And I'll remind everyone on the call that I do follow Russell Napier. He got the inflation call correct in 2020. And when he says we're going to see a return to capital investment on a massive scale over the next 15 to 20 years, I can see the early signs that that's starting to happen. And that's all going to be metals and mining intensive. So if Russell is right, commodities, and in particular metals and mining, could be the standout asset class over the next 2 decades, which is quite a statement, I know. But the signs are all positive, and they're aligning cyclically, secularly, and structurally to support our industry. So what's some of the evidence? The United States in the last, 15 months, have passed 3 landmark pieces of legislation. It started with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, signed a few days after my birthday in November of 2021. And that's going to drive investment into existing infrastructure around the United States. And anyone who travels in the United States, and I no longer live there, but you can see it in the airports, the roads, the rail bridges, that investment absolutely needs to happen. And it will start to happen because it will drive votes as well as economic growth and the multipliers that you get through infrastructure investment. So secondly, the CHIPS and Science Act. Now, this is not as directly metals intensive. It fits a little bit more under that geopolitical challenge, between the United States and China. But, look, all that said, the Global Semiconductor Industry Association in December of this year highlighted that, this act alone has sparked $200 billion in private investment across 40 different semiconductor ecosystem projects. Now, there are not all fabs like the TMC, Phoenix fab. There are actually 2 of them in Phoenix for TSMC. It's all the infrastructure and everything that supports, the fabrication of semiconductors in the United States. This is a sector that the United States has determined that it wants to support. And again, it's not as metal intensive. Obviously, there's a bit of metal that goes into all the new factories that are being developed. Certainly a bit of silicon metal that goes into semiconductors and in tin and some other niche and exotics. But the CHIPS and Science Act, starts to change things a little bit. And finally, perhaps the biggie, the Inflation Reduction Act, passed and signed a week later. We're already seeing $125 billion all around of loans and grants being granted to some favored, largely green or carbon abatement industries. This data is from the U.S. Department of Energy, the Loan Program Office. This office is going to be tremendously busy over the next 5 years as they spend the allotted, close to $400 billion in funding, and that's going to see, the government expects anywhere from 8 to 12 times private multiplier on the amount of direct government spending that's going to be supported by the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is the whole electric vehicle battery chain, being developed in a big way.